My friend, there's something many older adults don't really think about. Your lungs are not only affected by pollution, weather, or age. They're also affected by what you eat every single day. Some foods look perfectly normal, harmless even, but quietly make it harder for your lungs to breathe, increase inflammation, or simply leave them feeling more tired after every meal. I want you to imagine a morning you wake up, step outside, take a breath in, but your breath is shorter than usual. There's no pain, no coughing, but something keeps your chest from fully opening. And you start wondering, are my lungs getting weaker or is something else going on? Have you ever felt that? One of my patients, Harvey 71, once sighed and told me, James, I don't smoke, I exercise. But lately my breathing feels so heavy. When I asked about his diet, he answered casually, I just eat normal stuff, nothing special. But that normal stuff, processed food, fried foods, sugar, trans fats, often turns out to be the quiet enemy. Those foods silently make the lungs more inflamed, hold on to more fluid, and make it harder for them to work smoothly. I've seen this in so many people after age 60. Their breathing doesn't get worse because they're weak, but because their lungs are forced to fight too many things coming from their plate. That's why I want to talk to you about today's topic. Not to scare you, not to make you afraid to eat, but to help you understand what your lungs need and what is quietly hurting them. Sometimes just changing a few small items on your plate is enough to give your lungs back the lightness they truly deserve after a lifetime of working in silence for you. Food one, fried foods. The crispy enemy that tires out your lungs without you noticing, my friend. I want you to remember the last time you ate something fried, French fries, fried chicken egg rolls, or even just a piece of meat dropped into a pan of hot oil. Crispy, fragrant, delicious. But afterward, have you ever felt heavier? Maybe your breathing felt a bit harder, your chest a little tight. Have you ever noticed that one of my patients, Susan 68, once asked me in surprise, James, why is it that every time I eat fried food the next day, my breathing feels heavier? She thought it was just a coincidence, but it wasn't. Fried foods are one of those things that make your lungs work twice as hard, and most people have no idea. When oil is heated at high temperatures, it creates harmful oxidized compounds. Those enter your body and trigger inflammation, especially in the lungs. I often explain it to my patients like this. Your lungs are like two delicate doors. Every time you eat fried food, you're throwing a little more dust onto those doors. Not real dust, of course, but inflammatory particles. Things that narrow the airways, thicken mucus, and tighten the tiny air sacs in your lungs. In younger people, the body repairs quickly. But after 60, the lungs aren't as flexible as they used to be. When Susan heard this, she sighed, I never thought something crispy and tasty could tire out my lungs like that. I asked her to slowly cut down on fried foods over the next month. When she came back, what she told me stayed with me. James, I feel like I'm breathing lighter, almost like my lungs aren't sealed shut anymore. My friend, fried foods are not an instant enemy. They don't attack all at once. But they are a silent enemy. Every time you eat a little, your lungs carry a little more burden. And sometimes to help your lungs breathe deeply again, you just need a little less crunch on your plate. Food. Processed foods, tissues, convenient bites that quietly age your lungs faster. My friend, I want you to think about the foods we call quick fixes or just something easy. Sausages, deli meats, ham, instant noodles, canned foods. Convenient, fast, no effort. But have you ever finished eating them and felt heavier breath, a bit shorter? Have you ever wondered why one of my patients, Malcolm 70, once told me, genuinely confused, James, I exercise regularly, I take my medications, but my lungs still don't feel better. I feel like I'm always short on air. So I asked him about his diet. He said I live alone, so I eat a lot of packaged and ready-made foods. It's easier. And that was the problem. Processed foods are usually loaded with salt nitrates, preservatives, and additives. Things that once inside your body trigger inflammation, cause fluid retention, and make the airway swell, and the air sacs in your lungs function poorly. I explained it to Malcolm with a simple image. Your lungs are like a sponge. These foods make that sponge heavier, wetter, and less elastic. When the lungs lose their elasticity, every breath feels shallow, rushed, and unsatisfying. Malcolm went quiet for a moment, then said, I never realized that everyday convenience could tire out my lungs like that. I didn't ask him to quit everything overnight. I simply suggested he replace 3 processed meals a week with fresh, home-cooked ones. 4 weeks later, he came back and said, "I'm breathing easier. I can walk longer without getting winded. My lungs almost feel younger." My friend, processed foods don't destroy your lungs in a single day, but they quietly wear them down meal by meal, week by week. And often the best way to let your lungs recover is not found in a pill, but in going back to real, fresh, simple foods, so your lungs no longer have to battle what they were never meant to handle. Food, refined sugar, a sweet flavor that makes every breath feel heavier. My friend, I want you to think about how you feel after drinking a soda, a very sweet milk tea, or eating a piece of cake that's a little too sugary. Have you ever noticed that afterward you feel more tired, your breathing is shallower, or your chest feels slightly tight? If you've ever felt that, it's not your imagination. One of my patients, Margaret 73, once told me, "Surprise, James, I just ate a few cookies, and the next day my breathing felt heavier." She thought it was just the weather, but I knew the real problem was refined sugar. Sugar doesn't just cause weight gain or raise blood sugar. It also triggers inflammation throughout the body, including the lungs. When your blood sugar spikes, your body has to release more inflammatory molecules called cytokines. And as you know, the lungs are very sensitive to inflammation. I often use this simple image with my patients. Imagine your lungs are like two soft cloths. When your body is inflamed, those cloths become stiffer, less elastic, and harder to open when you breathe in. That's why older adults who eat a lot of sugar often feel shallow breathing, chest tightness, easily tired when walking, mild wheezing, or congestion. When I suggested Margaret cut down on sugar for 3 weeks and replace cookies with low-sugar fruits, she laughed and said, "James, I don't think I can do that." But she tried, and at her next visit, she walked in with a big smile. "I don't just feel lighter. My breathing feels lighter too, James. Like my lungs aren't being pressed down anymore." My friend, refined sugar doesn't make your lungs hurt right away. It simply makes them more inflamed, heavier, and less flexible day after day. And sometimes for your lungs to feel clear again, you don't need more medicine. You just need a little less sweet on your plate, so your breath can become sweet in its own natural way. Food, or milk and dairy products, that chest heaviness many people never see coming. My friend, I want you to think back to a night when you drank a warm glass of milk or enjoyed a piece of cheese before bed. Have you ever woken up the next morning feeling like your throat had more phlegm, your breathing felt heavier, or your chest felt just a little clogged as if something was coating it? If you've ever felt that, you're not alone. One of my patients, Leonard 72, once told me, "James, I don't get it. I'm not coughing, but every morning I cough up so much phlegm. I thought it was the cold weather. Turns out it was milk." He said it half jokingly, but it's something I see all the time in older adults. Milk and dairy products aren't bad. In fact, they're great for bones and can help with sleep. But for some people, especially those over 60, milk can thicken mucus, making phlegm stickier and harder to clear. And when the lungs are covered with thicker mucus, they have to work harder just to keep your airways open. I explained it to Leonard with a simple image. Imagine your lungs as two window shutters. When mucus gets thicker, it's harder to open the shutters and harder for sunlight or air to get through. What makes this tricky is that many people don't notice right away. It shows up quietly as a slight heaviness in the chest, difficulty taking a full breath, mild morning wheezing, more phlegm than usual. When I suggested Leonard cut back on nighttime dairy and replace it with warm herbal tea, just 10 days later, he came back and said, "James, my breathing feels easier in the morning. My chest feels lighter. I had no idea milk could make my lungs work that hard." My friend, dairy isn't the villain, but for many older adults, it is like a heavy blanket laid over the lungs, warm, but a little too much. And sometimes the best way to help your lungs feel clearer, lighter, is simply to give them a little less warmth from dairy each day. Food, 5 fatty red meat, the silent burden that forces your lungs to breathe harder. My friend, I want you to remember a hearty meal, a tender steak, a rack of ribs, or a beautifully braised piece of fatty pork. Delicious, comforting, satisfying. But after eating, have you ever felt your breathing become heavier, your body slower, maybe even needing to sit down because your chest felt full? Have you ever experienced that? One of my patients, Francis 69, told me, "James, I love red meat, but lately after eating it, I breathe harder. I get tired fast. I thought something was wrong with my heart." He was truly worried, but when I asked about his diet, I knew the answer was hiding in the foods he loved most. Fatty red meat contains high amounts of saturated fat. When it enters the body, it triggers inflammation. Quiet, invisible inflammation that you don't feel right away, but that affects the lungs directly. I explained it to him like this. When the body's inflamed, the lungs are like two bags that have been filled with water, heavier, harder to open, so your breath becomes shorter. And older adults are even more sensitive to inflammation because the lungs lose some of their natural elasticity with age. To make things worse, saturated fat increases the risk of acid reflux, which can cause coughing, wheezing, and nighttime breathing problems. When I suggested he switch to leaner cuts and eat red meat just a few times a week, he looked genuinely sad. He said, "James, I've eaten like this my whole life." But a month later, he came back smiling. "I can't believe it. I'm breathing easier. My lungs don't feel like they're being weighed down anymore." My friend, red meat isn't the enemy, but too much of the fatty parts adds a silent burden to the lungs day after day, year after year. And sometimes just trimming a little fat is enough to give your lungs back their natural lightness. Food 6, salt and very salty foods, the invisible water weight that keeps the lungs from opening fully. My friend, I want you to think about how you feel after a salty meal. A bowl of instant noodles, a salty fish dish, pickled vegetables, or even the habit of dipping everything into fish sauce. It tastes great, but a few hours later, have you ever felt your chest tighten, your breath feel shallow, or an unusual thirst that won't go away? If you've experienced that, believe me, your lungs were sending you a message. One of my patients, Helen, 75, said to me, confused, "James, I didn't eat anything strange, but after a salty dinner the next morning, I can't take a deep breath." She thought it was a cold or the weather, but the cause was much simpler: salt. When you eat too much salt, your body is forced to hold on to water to balance sodium levels. This water retention doesn't only swell the legs or puff up the face, it also causes fluid buildup in tissues, including around the lungs and airways. I explained it with a gentle image. Imagine your lungs as two sponges. When your body retains water, those sponges get heavier, thicker, and they can't expand fully when you breathe in. Older adults feel this even more because the heart pumps less efficiently, the kidneys clear sodium more slowly, the lungs lose elasticity with age, so just a bit more salt than usual can make you feel shallow breathing, chest tightness, fatigue when walking, difficulty breathing when lying down. When I asked Helen to reduce salt for just 2 weeks, she doubted it, just cutting salt. Will that really help, James? But at her next visit, she held my hand and said, "My breathing is completely different, lighter, clearer. I never knew salt affected the lungs this much. My friend, salt isn't bad, but too much salt is like pouring a bucket of water into your body, and your lungs have to work twice as hard just to keep your breathing steady. And sometimes for your lungs to expand freely and feel light again, all you need is to season just a little less. Food. White bread and white noodles, the soft and easy foods that quietly weigh down the lungs after age 60. My friend, I want you to think about the foods many older adults choose because they're easy. Easy to chew, easy to digest, easy to prepare. White bread, white noodles, white rice noodles, white pho noodles. They seem harmless, familiar, gentle, comforting. But have you ever eaten them and then felt sleepy, breathing shallow, or your body feeling heavy as if you were low on oxygen? Have you ever felt that? One of my patients, Richard, 70, once told me something I'll never forget. "James, I eat white bread every morning, but the more I eat it, the harder it feels to breathe. I thought something was wrong with my lungs." I smiled and said, "Your lungs aren't getting weaker. Your food is simply making your body work harder." White bread and white noodles are refined carbohydrates. Inside the body, they spike your blood sugar quickly, then drop it just as fast. That sharp rise and fall creates inflammation, and inflammation, even mild, is one of the biggest enemies of lung elasticity. Many people don't know this. Mild inflammation makes the lungs stiffer, heavier, and more prone to shortness of breath. I explained it to Richard with a simple image. Imagine your body as a calm lake. Refined carbs are like throwing a big stone into that lake. They create waves, and your lungs feel those waves first. Refined carbs also increase mucus in the body, thicker mucus, harder lung expansion, shallow breath. When I suggested that he replace half of his white bread with oatmeal or whole grain bread, He frowned. James, I'm old. Changing habits isn't easy. But 2 weeks later, he returned and said, James, my breathing really is different. No more heaviness. No more feeling like I have to take big breaths just to catch up. My friend, these soft, white, easy foods aren't the enemy. But for lungs over age 60 already less elastic, they become an invisible burden. Sometimes to bring back gentle breathing, all you need is to switch white to whole grain, refined to natural. Your lungs will thank you. Food. Sugary, creamy desserts, the momentary pleasure that leaves long-lasting heaviness in the lungs. My friend, think about how it feels to eat a soft slice of cake or a cold, creamy scoop of ice cream in the afternoon. The sweetness lifts your mood. The richness melts on your tongue. But afterward, have you ever felt slower breathing? Chest heaviness, sleepiness, and low energy. Have you ever noticed that one of my patients, Denise, 67, once laughed and said, James, I love cake. It makes me happy. But the next day, my breathing feels heavy. She thought she was sensitive to dairy. But as we talked, I realized the real culprit: sugar plus saturated fat, a combination found in nearly every pastry and ice cream. I explained to her sugar triggers inflammation. Saturated fat makes the lungs less elastic. Together, they create a burden the lungs after age 60 can't recover from easily. When the body becomes inflamed, the lungs feel it first. Breathing becomes heavier. Mucus thickens, airways narrow. And it doesn't show up instantly. It creeps in quietly like a thin fog forming on a window. I told Denise, your lungs are like a delicate leaf. Sugary, creamy foods coat that leaf in a layer of oil and sugar, making it harder to catch the wind. She nodded softly. When I asked her to cut down on cake for just 1 month, she agreed, though, reluctantly. 3 weeks later, she said, James, I'm shocked. I breathe lighter, and I no longer feel that heavy, sluggish feeling after eating. My friend, sugary and creamy foods aren't toxic. They bring mind gnawing. They comfort the heart. But for older lungs already fragile and sensitive, they act like a thick blanket placed over each breath. Sometimes reducing just one slice of cake is the way to bring back the lightness your lungs have been missing for years. Food. Spicy foods, the satisfying heat that irritates the lungs and shortens the breath. My friend, think back to the last time you ate something truly spicy. Spicy noodles, chili paste, hot broth, fresh chilies. At first you might feel warm, sweaty, even like your airways opened up a bit. But afterward, have you ever noticed light wheezing, a dry cough, or shallow breathing for hours? Have you ever felt that? One patient of mine, Carlos, 71, said, James, I've loved spicy food all my life, but now even a little spice makes me cough and my chest feels heavy. He thought it was his throat, but I knew his lungs were reacting to overstimulation. Spicy foods, especially those heavy in chili pepper and chili paste, contain capsaicin, which can make airways more sensitive, increase coughing, irritate lung lining, temporarily increase mucus, I explained to him. Think of your airways like a small road. Eating spicy food is like driving too fast. It kicks up more dust. The lungs work twice as hard to clean it. Younger people can recover quickly, but after age 60, airway lining becomes thinner, weaker, and more reactive. Carlos sighed, I didn't know spicy food could make my breathing so short. I asked him to cut the heat level in half for 2 weeks. When he returned, he said, James, I don't get stuck breathing anymore. I cough less. Turns out I was tiring my lungs without realizing it. My friend, spicy food isn't the enemy, but for older lungs, delicate like thin paper, too much heat becomes a burden. Sometimes reducing just a little spice allows your lungs to breathe deeper, softer, and calmer. Food. 10. Soda, the instant refreshment that quietly makes the lungs pay the price, my friend. I want you to remember the feeling of opening a can of soda, the loud fizz, the bubbling foam, the cold sweetness hitting your throat. It's fast, satisfying, addictive. But after drinking it, have you ever felt heavier breathing, a full, tight stomach, or trouble taking a deep breath? If you have, that's no coincidence. One of my patients, Carolyn, 70, once said, James, I don't smoke, I don't drink. So why do my lungs feel heavy? But every time I drink soda, my breathing gets worse. I gently explained that soda is one of the silent lung stressors most people never think about. Whichever, first, the extreme sugar load triggers full body inflammation, and lungs incredibly sensitive to inflammation react with narrowed airways, thicker mucus, and reduced breath capacity. Second, carbonation fills the stomach with quiet, pushing the diaphragm upward. I often tell patients, when the diaphragm gets pushed up, it's like lowering the ceiling of your lung room. You can't take a deep breath even if you try. Third, additives and soda coloring flavorings. Phosphoric acid can irritate the airways, especially in older adults. When I asked Caroline to avoid soda for a month, she laughed. I thought soda only made me gain weight. I didn't know it affected my breathing. But at her next visit, she told me, James, I breathe easier now. I don't get winded climbing stairs anymore. My friend's soda doesn't damage the lungs overnight, but it erodes your breath quietly like dust collecting on a fan. It still works, but weaker and weaker. Sometimes replacing just one can of soda with a warm glass of water is enough to give the lungs the space they've been longing for. A final word for you, my friend, after age 60. The lungs aren't as strong as they once were, but that doesn't mean they're hopeless. They can still heal. They can still expand. They can still breathe deeply and softly if we protect them from the quiet harms of daily food. The foods we discussed: fried foods, processed foods, refined sugar, dairy, fatty, red meat, salty foods, white carbs, sugary desserts, spicy foods. Soda aren't instant enemies. They're simply small burdens that accumulate over time, making the lungs work harder, breathe shorter, inflame easier, and feel heavier without you even noticing. I've seen many older adults reclaim light, easy breathing just by changing a few small things at the table. Not medicine, not machines, just kind, thoughtful choices for their own bodies. And the beautiful part, you don't need to give everything up. Just reduce gently, gradually, and listen to your lungs. Breath is the one gift that stays with us our entire lives. And every small change you make today is your way of telling your lungs, thank you for carrying me. From now on, I will take better care of you.